Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's founder is Nathan Hale. I'd like to give a big shout out to Braden, aka John Adams, for recommending Nathan Hale. If you have a founder you'd like to learn more about, definitely leave their name down in the comments, and I'll make sure to get to it as soon as I can. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for videos about the American Revolution 5 days a week. So let's talk about Nathan Hale. Now, Nathan Hale is pretty famous in American lore as a martyr for the Patriot cause during the Revolutionary War. Now, the story goes that Nathan Hale was a great spy who went in and found out things about the British and then was unfortunately hung in front of everyone and said the famous phrase, "My only regret is I have but one life to give for my country." Now, unfortunately, like with most of the great stories throughout history that have become legendary, there is some truth to that tale, but there's some not truth. But don't worry, at the end I will explain what Nathan Hale did that was so great. But first, let's go through his life. Nathan Hale was a young man, just 21 years old, who had studied at Yale University and become a school teacher when the American Revolutionary War broke out. And he wanted to fight for his country, so he signed up. Shortly after this, George Washington comes around saying, "I need a spy. I need someone who will go into New York City and spy for me. Any volunteers?" And he looked around, and guess what? There was one volunteer, Nathan Hale. So he said, "Okay, Nathan, you want to be a spy?" And Nathan was like, "Yeah, definitely." So George Washington said, "Come on. You're going to go into New York City. You're going to find out all the information you can about the British, their troop movements, their numbers, their supply lines. Come on back, tell us what's going on, and we can win this war." And Nathan Hale said, "Great." So he went on down to New York City. Now, unfortunately, in hindsight, just grabbing the first guy off the street, the only volunteer, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be the best spy. And to be frank, Hale made some mistakes right off the bat. He walked into New York City, and some of the people there kind of knew who he was, so they were already suspicious of him walking in. And then who comes around but Robert Rogers, who is famous as one of the Queen's Rangers, an important soldier for Great Britain years before this and for years after this. And Robert Rogers sees this, so he tries to be a little sneaky, and he goes up to Nathan Hale, and he goes, "Hey, Nathan, hey, guess what? Come over here, I got a secret. I'm a spy for George Washington." And Nathan Hale went, "No way. Me too." Now, he didn't say that outright, but he hinted at it. So Robert Rogers invites Hale over for dinner. And Hale goes over for dinner, and there are a bunch of soldiers that arrest Hale. And now Hale, a spy you might expect would be good at lying, Hale didn't. He just admitted to being a spy and was therefore found guilty for treason. He was quickly brought to the gallows where he allegedly had said the famous line. Now, we don't know exactly what he said, but he was calm and collected. There are first-hand accounts and second-hand accounts which do differ in what he said, but they all agree he was cool and collected. He probably spoke for about a minute, and then he was executed. And his execution was just 14 days after being chosen as a spy by George Washington. Now, I don't want to belittle this man's service. He did literally give his life for his country for a cause he believed in. But when we do hear his story, we do want to take it with a grain of salt because, unfortunately, he wasn't a very good spy. He got caught right away and was executed 14 days after he was appointed in Connecticut. So that includes travel to New York City in the 18th century, the late 18th century, which was not fast. Now, as for the famous line, "My only regret is I have but one life to give for my country." Now, while he probably didn't say that immediately, it was attributed to him from a friend, one of his friends from college, because in college they used to read a book called Cato's Letters, which was written about 80 years before the American Revolution, but was very popular at the time because it spoke a lot to the ideals that the Patriots were fighting for. And in that book, there is the line, in the translation of the book, there is a line, "My only regret is I have but one life to give for my country." Now, the friend who probably attributed this to Nathan Hale was his old college buddy, Benjamin Talmadge. Now, Benjamin Talmadge has become famous over the last few years. If you've seen the television show Turn, Benjamin Talmadge, after the death of Nathan Hale, George Washington learns from his mistake. And this is what's really important about Nathan Hale, is George Washington learned from his mistake. You can't just pick anyone you send in. You have to put together a team, and while they may not be perfectly trained, at least have some idea of what espionage includes. So Washington goes to Nathan Hale's good friend, Benjamin Talmadge, who was also a student with him at Yale and also a former school teacher, and he has Benjamin Talmadge organize a spy ring. And that becomes the Culper spy ring. And it really does happen as fallout from the death of Nathan Hale. So while the story we know and love about Nathan Hale might not be 100% accurate, it might have grown up as stories are wont to do from back then, he did very significantly affect not just the operation of George Washington's army and his spy ring and intelligence gathering, but arguably the outcome of the Revolutionary War. So that's the story of Nathan Hale. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like I said, hit like and subscribe, and I will be back with another founder for you tomorrow.